Great ones, hear our voice, together as one in reverence.
Another week, another Resident Evil demo, this time across every single format you can lay your hands on. And even though I looked long and hard, a Lon Chaney cameo eludes me, but I'm sure it's in there somewhere. Come on Capcom, don't let me down. Something they certainly haven't done thus far with Resident Evil 8. It looked very impressive across every format, but here with the Xbox One in tow, just how much have they had to sacrifice? Let's dive in.
Now, the tea should be ready. Come help me, Elena, please.
So it's not a great surprise that we're looking at a very similar construction of both frame rate, performance and image quality that we saw on the PS4 Pro and the PS4. So looking at the Xbox One X and the Xbox One S as the last generation versions, they have a similar target resolution. So in the resolution mode for Xbox One X, as you can see here, it targets a 3840 by 2160 image, again using a reconstruction element, that interlace option as it's called on the PC mode in previous games. The image is sharp and crisp, and it uses a sharpening filter to improve it. Now going over to the Xbox One S, this drops right down to 1600 by 900p, and you can see the stark difference here, but that's not the whole picture. There's two elements here that I want to discuss, and I've said this for years and years and years. Resolution isn't important, image quality is. Resolution and image quality are not one in the same. This game proves it perfectly. So you can see the stark jump from a 4K image right down to a 900p image, but it's not just the resolution count, there's much more going on. If we compare this to the PlayStation 4 version, which is also 1600 by 900, we can see the image is nowhere near the same. It's a lot softer, it's a lot muddier, there's less texture details, and generally this is because of two elements. One, I don't believe the PlayStation 4 uses the same reconstruction element that we're seeing on the Xbox One S. In fact, in this mode, I don't think the PlayStation 4 does. I think it natively renders at 1600 by 900, but that's not the full picture. The pixel counts all come out at 1600 by 900 on both consoles. There is no difference. Hence, the pixel count being pointless, because you can see the difference here. And this is because the reconstruction element, the shader cost, the inner triangle, not the geometry, but the inner triangle, all that element is far more expensive. The game is memory bound as well. I've said that before, and it's memory bound on the Xbox One S. So it's memory bound because of bandwidth, and it's memory bound because of VRAM allocation. And this means that it reduces everything in the frustum. So you get lower bitmap quality, you get lower texture resolution, you get lower filtering. All of those things impact it more on the S than any other version, but they all get affected. On top of that, obviously it's 1 GB less on these last generation versions. So there's 1 GB additional texture storage being used on the newer version, the PS5, the Series X and the Series S, than it is on this one, and obviously the PC as well. Now this interlace reconstruction mode can break down. Obviously you can see it on the Xbox One because of the low resolution. When you move, everything becomes blur. You can also see like a dithered shading pass, almost like VRS on the wall. See it under the light there, and as I move it goes blur, and then you can see that line, that stippling line down the screen itself. It stands out on the Xbox One. You can't see this on the PS4, any PlayStation version. You can't see it on the Series S and the Series X either. What you can see here though is the geometry itself kind of stretches and crushes up when you're moving the camera around. It looks frustum aligned, so there's something going on with the geometry on the PS4, and I'm not saying it's not happening on the Xbox, but because of the lower quality image you can't notice it as much. But like everything, there's much more going on under the hood than we can see from just this visual presentation. But because of the reconstruction, when you move the camera and walk, everything becomes very blur, and then when you stop, that reconstruction element joins those images back up. It looks better, it looks sharper, but it certainly is nowhere near what it looks like on the same 1600 by 900p resolution, and that's the point of this discussion. Beyond a certain point, resolution doesn't matter. You can see it perfectly here going from 1600 by 900 to the Series S, and then from the Series S at 1440p up to the Series X and the PS5 at 3840 by 2160. There's not a massive difference in image quality. It's definitely there, you can see it, but it's a much smaller, considering you're going from 1600 by 900 to 1600 by 900, and it looks such a significant leap. You can see it here when I'm running the game side by side. The PS4 is sharper, cleaner, and it's got more detail. There's less light sources, there's less post-processing, the texture details are not as good, the shading is not as high. All those elements combine to give you a much worse image on the Xbox One S, and that's why pixel counts are not really the conversation to be having. It's all about what the image looks like and how it presents on the screen, and there's a myriad of ways you can get to that point. You can check out my video when I discussed it more on the Marvel's Avengers over on IGN channel, and obviously much more on this game in the ray tracing mode, which I covered on that version as well. Go and check that video out. So the rest of the other versions all kind of balance out the same, and I've covered all the other elements in terms of ray tracing, so I'm not going to go over that again. So here, looking at the PS4 and the Xbox One S, comparing them side by side because they're on the same target, all those things I've just discussed, the image quality reduction, the sacrifice in effects, everything else still adds up to the game performing worse on the Xbox One S than it does on the PS4. So the PS4 is a 60 FPS title, but it dips heavily in certain points, but generally it's good enough to be there or thereabouts, and it's right option to leave it at this variable level. A 30 FPS cap if possible would be nice, but you can live with this even if it's not perfect. It does have dips. The Xbox One S is far and away nowhere near a 60 FPS title, so as you can see, it can be somewhere between 20 to 30% slower at times, 10-15 frames per second at its worst point, and it feels inconsistent. It stays within 16 to 33 milliseconds, so never any more than one refresh, which is good, but it would be beneficial if they could cap it at 30, but again that might not be impossible because it could actually make it deliver uneven frame pacing and actually make it feel a little worse. So arguably this is probably the best you're going to get. It's still not bad, but it generally feels like a 30 FPS title. And then if you move away from these base versions, obviously you've got the Series X and you've got the Series S and obviously the Xbox One X. And the Xbox One X, again, like I said, it targets 1920 by 1080 in the performance mode. And that again looks to be a native or a sharper construction or whatever it's doing than the standard reconstructed element we see on the higher resolution, very similar to the PS4. And like that, it's locked. Just like the Pro version in this mode, it's actually slightly better. There's no dips at all in gameplay, combat, walking through the scene, looking at the objects and scenery. None of that causes any stress buckles. In fact, the only dip in this version is the one cutscene which dips on all of them, by the non-ray trace version on the PS5 and the Series X. And it's GPU related, where the flies come out of your hand. Outside of that, there's not a dip at all in this version. It's perfect.
I haven't cut open a man in a while.
And then away from that, you go into the resolution mode, and it's very similar to as I covered on the Pro. It generally is a 30 FPS title, very, very similar performance metrics to the Xbox One S. In fact, you can see the comparison on screen between the two. So generally, the Xbox One X is the best version to play. If you don't have a Pro, that's the one to play next. Play it in that 1080p mode and you'll never look back. It's perfect performance. Again, that resolution mode is nice and sharp and nice and clean, and I do like it, but the performance inconsistencies means I'll always lean over to that 1080p 60 mode because it just feels better to play. And overall, I'm quite impressed with the quality they've delivered on the Xbox One X. They really have done very well to polish this game and utilise the engine and all the configurational options within the RE engine to make sure that it runs at the right level and the right performance across the appropriate format.
Took your damn time. You're welcome.
And then finally you've got the Series S and the Series X. Now the Series X, like the PS5, is native 4K on both modes, or at least reconstructed 4K on both modes, but as I've just covered, that doesn't really matter. The image quality is beautiful, it's sharp, it's clean, it looks crisp, the materials, the ray tracing is just as good, that refraction of light, that reflection on the floors. The sections in this demo where they got complete reflected glass on screen as well, reflecting the entire object, so they are using reflections quite heavily. and they look to be around the medium settings, but check out my PC version where I'll go a little bit more in that. And then the Series S version comes out at 1440p in both modes. Again, it's a reconstruction element, almost sure of it, 2560 by 1440. The ray tracing mode this time is just that stretch too far. It performs very similar to how the Xbox One S performs in its mode and how the Xbox One X performs in resolution mode. So it's a lower resolution than that, but it does have ray tracing, but it can hover somewhere between the 30s and 40s. And again, that just feels inconsistent in all my tested sections. So it's not the one that I would choose. I would turn it off, and then you get a pretty much locked 60 FPS. Couple of dips when you're trying to stress it out in terms of shooting flour bags, but overall there's no real concerns in that mode. And as you can see on the Series X, it's pretty much perfect on both modes. Again, there's a couple of dips like there was on the PS5 for the ray trace mode, and it does come across as being ever so slightly better in that mode, but outside of that mode it's a locked 60, so there's headroom and more to spare there, and that's exactly the same as it was on the PS5. But that ray trace mode, the dips are so minor in these sections so far that I would definitely leave it as it is and play in that ray trace mode for the additional benefit those graphical functions give you. The RE engine is impressive, certainly how well they've balanced it and scaled it across every piece of hardware here. Arguably, that Xbox base Xbox is a little scale too far. The image quality is softer, it's muddier, it's the one that really stands out as the worst looking and the worst performing of the lot. But if you've got the PS4, the Xbox One, it's still a cracking game. If you have got anything else, then pretty much anything else above that runs this game very well. You've got 2 modes on the Pro, you've got 2 modes on the Series X, Series S and the PS5. So if you are into ray tracing and you want to see some nice elements in terms of GI bounce, some reflections, then it is a good use there. I would really like them to use ray traced shadows. The game would massively benefit from ray tracing shadows, and the shadow mapping solution in here can show up some issues and errors, you know, in certain points as I'm playing through the title, and I'm sure I'll see more in the final game. So if they could add in ray trace shadows at a later date as an additional patch, I think that would be a big benefit, along with getting that ambient occlusion pass back on when ray tracing is on, because it can make some of the scenes look a little flat when there's no ambient occlusion running on there. But, you know, it's always best to add these things in as a compound function in your engine and then turn them on and off depending on the hardware that's running them. And then if you run the non-ray trace mode on the Series S and the Series X, then it's pretty much, or it is a locked 60 FPS on the Series X. There's no issues at all like the PS5, and on the Series S it's close to. So if you do have issues with that performance mode, which I think is it's a stretch too far for ray tracing on this particular piece of hardware, it's just not good enough. A 1080p target with ray tracing probably would have been a better choice. It would have probably got similar performance levels to what we're getting now in 1440p, maybe slightly worse probably, but overall that would have been a better choice for me, and I would have chosen that one. But anyway, either or, it's a great suite of titles across every piece of hardware you might add, and therefore you can now know that the game coming out later this week, you haven't got to worry about how it will perform. It will perform perfectly unless you've got a base console. Anyway, that's it for now. If you like this, obviously please support me by sharing, putting a comment down below, putting a like on this video, because likes also help, and obviously support me on Patreon if you can. Remember, I am one-man band, completely self-funded, and I do all this in my spare time. Anyway, you guys and girls take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.